blood flow, heart sounds, and the cardiac cycle. So the cardiac cycle is the sequence of events that happens between the relaxation and contraction of the heart. Relaxation is called diastole, contraction is called systole. Principles of pressure and flow. This is what's going to make the blood flow. So right here they are using a syringe in order to show you that. Pressure 1, pressure 2. The concept in here is high to low. So if you have more in here and you have less in here, then everything will flow this way. So fairly easy to understand, high to low pressure. So then the blood will flow from the right atrium to the right ventricle. Why? Because the right atrium will contract first. Therefore, the pressure in the right atrium is going to be higher than the pressure in the right ventricle. Cardiac cycle is the sequence of events that are going to happen in your heart. So the first thing that is going to happen is ventricular filling. The ventricular filling right here obviously is going to happen because there's going to be high pressure in the atrium, low pressure in the ventricle. The blood will flow from high pressure to low pressure, and that's what's going to cause the first part of the cardiac cycle, which is the ventricular filling. Step number 2 in the cardiac cycle, isovolumetric contraction. Iso means the same. Isovolumetric means same volume. Why? Because if the pressure in here is, let's say, 3, and the pressure right here in your pulmonary trunk, more specifically right here in the valves, let's say is 9. So if this is 3 and this is 9, obviously the blood will not flow because this is low pressure, this is high pressure. So isovolumetric contraction, because even though the ventricle is contracting, right, it started in 0, it went to 1, to 2, to 3, 4. So the contraction is increasing, but the volume does not change because it doesn't get pumped here. Why? Because even though the pressure is increasing here, it's not higher than the pressure that you have right here in the pulmonary trunk. Therefore, this amount of blood will not get pumped. Guess what the next step is going to be? Well, eventually the pressure right here is going to be 10, and in here is going to be 9. In that case, this blood will get pumped from the ventricle into your pulmonary trunk. That is going to give you the next step, which is ventricular ejection. And this is called like systole. What happens after this gets pumped? Then obviously systole is first. Then the ventricle needs to relax, ventricular diastole. So then the cycle can start over again. The atrium will pump the blood into the ventricle because the last step of the cardiac cycle is ventricular relaxation or isovolumetric relaxation. Why is also isovolumetric? Because there's going to be certain volume in here that is going to remain from the ventricular ejection. The volume in here is going to be 130. Once you pump only 70. So right here always stays 60. That's why it's called isovolumetric relaxation. Let's keep going down. Heart sounds. Heart sounds are the sounds that are produced by the valves. When the atrioventricular valve close, that is the first heart sound. And when the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve close, that is the second heart sound. Sometimes people can have third heart sounds. It's normal, but not in everybody. So again, we have in here the cardiac cycle. We already talked about it. This is just a graph showing you the different type of pressures that you have in your heart. So it's looking not only at how the blood flows in your heart, also how the heart contracts and how you see that in the electrocardiogram. So if you have in here cardiac cycle, again, we said first is ventricular filling. So I told you it's more or less 130 milliliters of blood. Then isovolumetric contraction, because even though the ventricle is contracting, the blood does not get pumped. Number 3 is going to be ventricular ejection. And the last one, isovolumetric relaxation. Let's keep going down. Overview of volume changes. Okay, we said that when the heart pumps, the stroke volume is going to be 70 milliliters. So you have in there 60 milliliters left. Then the atrium is going to pump the blood, right, from the atrium to the ventricle, 30 milliliters. This just falls because of gravity. And then the atrium is going to produce systolic contraction. That's another 40. So this total is going to be 130. What's the stroke volume again? In the ventricular systole is 70 milliliters. And the end systolic volume again is going to be 60. And the cycle starts over again. So if you keep scrolling down, another thing that is very important that you need to understand is what it says in here. Equal output by the two ventricles is essential to homeostasis. So the amount of blood that you pump in your right ventricle is the same amount of blood that you pump in your left ventricle. So right ventricle and left ventricle are going to pump the same amount, because otherwise blood is going to accumulate either in your lungs or in your body. And obviously that's going to cause a problem. You may die from that. So if you keep scrolling down, well, in here it's just explaining what I was telling you. Right ventricle output is more than ventricle output. you start accumulating fluid in the lungs. And down here, right here, the left ventricle output is higher than the right ventricle, then the fluid accumulates in your body. So then if you keep scrolling down, that's obviously going to be called congestive heart failure, and that's about it.